In the quiet suburban sprawl of Southwood, the Anderson family found their dream home. Their house, a sprawling two-story Victorian, seemed too good to be true with its spacious rooms, a sprawling garden, and an unbeatable price. As they settled in, they dismissed the local rumors about the house's mysterious past as nothing more than small-town superstition. The first sign that something was amiss came on a stormy night in October. The wind howled like a mourning ghost, and the rain beat against the windows relentlessly. Inside, the family gathered in the living room, trying to ignore the unsettling atmosphere. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness. They assumed it was just a power outage, but when the lights returned, every single door in the house was inexplicably open. In the following days, the family tried to rationalize the strange occurrences. However, things escalated quickly. Doors would slam shut without any breeze, cold spots appeared randomly, and whispers echoed through the halls, too faint to discern but loud enough to feel their eerie presence. One evening, as Linda Anderson was cooking dinner, she saw a figure in the reflection of the kitchen window. A pale, gaunt woman, standing just behind her, staring intently. Linda spun around, heart racing, only to find no one there. She mentioned it to her husband, Mark, who was quick to suggest it was just stress from the move. Their son, Tommy, had his own encounters. He spoke of a friend he made, a boy named Charlie, who played with him in his room. Concerned, Linda and Mark checked on him one night, only to find Tommy talking and laughing by himself. When asked about Charlie, Tommy said he lived in the closet and didn't like grown-ups. As the days turned into weeks, the family's initial skepticism was worn down by the constant, unexplainable terror. They started researching the history of the house and discovered it was once owned by the Whitmore family in the late 1800s. The Whitmores were a reclusive bunch, with the matriarch, Eliza Whitmore, rumored to be involved in the occult. The townsfolk spoke of tragic events and unexplained disappearances linked to the house, events that were never fully resolved. Determined to find out more, Mark visited the local library. He pored over old newspapers and public records, uncovering a disturbing event. In 1894, the entire Whitmore family had vanished without a trace. The only clue left behind was a diary belonging to Eliza, filled with cryptic entries about opening a doorway to another realm. Feeling overwhelmed and frightened, the Andersons decided to contact a renowned psychic, Madame Noller, hoping she could cleanse the house. Her presence in the house brought a heavy, suffocating air, as if the very walls were resisting her. As she walked through each room, her demeanor grew increasingly uneasy. In Tommy's room, she paused, her face pale as if drained of blood. "This room," she whispered, "is a nexus. A doorway between our world and something else." Before she could elaborate, a loud crash echoed through the house, and Tommy's scream cut through the air. Rushing to his room, they found the closet door wide open, and Tommy nowhere in sight. Madame Noller's eyes were wide with fear. "The door has been opened again, and the boy has gone through." Their house fell into chaos as they searched desperately for Tommy, but there was no sign of him. Madame Noller insisted that the only way to bring Tommy back was to close the gateway, a ritual that required confronting the spirits tied to the house. With no other options, the Andersons agreed to the ritual. That night, as the storm raged outside mirroring their own turmoil, they gathered in Tommy's room. Madame Noller began chanting in a language they couldn't understand, her voice rising over the thunder. Shadows danced along the walls, twisting and coiling like smoke. The air grew colder, and the sense of dread deepened. Just as the ritual reached its peak, a shriek tore through the house, silencing the storm outside. The room went still, the only sound Madame Noller's heavy breathing. Slowly, the closet door creaked open. From the darkness within the closet, a faint, ghostly light began to emerge, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls as if alive. Linda clutched Mark's hand tightly, her eyes wide with terror. The room felt oppressively cold, and a palpable sense of dread filled the air. Madame Nola's voice, now trembling, continued the incantation, her words slicing through the thick, supernatural fog that had enveloped the room. The light from the closet grew stronger, illuminating a figure standing in the threshold, a child, looking remarkably like Tommy, but with hollow, sunken eyes that spoke of unspeakable horrors. "Tommy!" Linda called out, her voice cracking with a mixture of hope and fear. The figure remained silent, its gaze fixed beyond the family, as if looking at something they couldn't see. Suddenly, a harsh, guttural voice echoed through the room, coming from the closet but belonging to no one they could see. "He is ours now," it boomed, causing the windows to rattle and the lights to flicker violently. Madame Nola raised her voice, her words becoming more forceful, demanding the spirits release the boy. The house responded with an intense shaking, as if it were in the throes of an earthquake. Pictures fell from the walls, and books were flung from shelves as the supernatural storm intensified. Without warning, the figure in the closet stepped forward, crossing into the room. The temperature dropped further, and a thin layer of frost spread across the floor. "Mommy, Daddy," the figure whispered with a voice that was Tommy's yet tainted with an otherworldly echo. Linda moved forward instinctively, but Mark held her back, his instincts warning him that something was amiss. Madame Nola's incantations grew louder, more desperate. She threw a handful of a powdery substance into the air, which ignited with a flash of blue light. The figure stopped, its expression twisting into one of confusion and pain. "The portal is unstable," Madame Nola shouted over the chaos. "We must close it now, or the connection will be lost forever." Mark, seeing an opportunity, lunged forward, reaching for Tommy. His fingers brushed his son's arm, feeling the icy touch of his skin. But as he tried to pull him back, an invisible force pushed him away, sending him sprawling across the floor. Linda screamed, a sound of pure maternal desperation, and dove forward. She grasped Tommy's hand, holding it with a strength born of sheer determination. "You're coming home, Tommy," she yelled, pulling with all her might against the unseen force. The room vibrated with a deafening roar, and a blinding light filled the space, emanating from the closet. The figure that looked like Tommy began to fade, becoming translucent, his features distorting as if being pulled back into the darkness. "We need more power," Madame Nola cried out, turning to the family. "Think of your love for him, your memories. It's the only way." Mark and Linda closed their eyes, tears streaming down their faces as they concentrated on their happiest moments with Tommy, his laughter, his playful spirit, his love. The room filled with a warm light, fighting back against the cold darkness emanating from the closet. As their memories and love formed a beacon of emotional energy, the figure began to solidify, stepping further into the warmth of the room. The harsh voice from the closet screamed in rage and frustration, a sound so terrifying it seemed to shake the very foundation of the house. Yet, as the family's love enveloped Tommy, the closet's light dimmed, and the figure's malevolent influence waned. Tommy's eyes, once hollow, began to regain some of their former warmth and recognition. "Mommy, Daddy," he whispered, his voice trembling. Linda reached out again, her fingers touching her son's. This time, there was no resistance. She pulled him into a tight embrace, sobbing with relief. However, the victory was short-lived. The closet door began to creak ominously, the light inside flaring up once more as if gathering strength for another assault. Madame Nola, exhausted but resolute, turned back to the closet, preparing for what was to come next. "We've only weakened it," she said, her voice hoarse. "The portal is still open, and it won't stop until it reclaims what it considers its own. We must end this, once and for all." The family stood together, united and determined, facing the unknown horrors still lurking within their new home, ready to fight to keep their family whole. The darkness of the closet seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, as if feeding on the fear that filled the room. The door swung slowly, creaking ominously with each movement, revealing glimpses of a world beyond, a realm that defied the laws of nature and human understanding. From within the depths, shadowy figures twisted and contorted, reaching out towards the light of the living room where the Anderson family stood. Madame Noller, her face drawn and pale, chanted louder, her words slicing through the tension. "We must seal it now," she cried. "Grab hold of anything you can use as a symbol of closure and protection." Frantically, the family grabbed items laden with personal significance, photographs of ancestors, a cross that had been in Mark's family for generations, a locket Linda wore that contained pictures of her children. They placed them around the perimeter of the closet, forming a barrier of memories and faith. As they worked, the air around them thickened, and the temperature plummeted. A deep, guttural laugh echoed from the closet, chilling them to their bones. "You cannot close what has been opened by the Whitmore," the voice boomed, its tone dripping with malice. Ignoring the threats, Madame Noller began the sealing ritual. She drew symbols in the air with her hands, her fingers tracing complex patterns that glowed with a faint, ethereal light. The items placed around the closet began to glow as well, linked by a shimmering thread of energy. Meanwhile, Tommy, still embraced by his mother, whispered fearfully, "It wants to take me back, Mommy. It says I belong there." Linda kissed his forehead, whispering back fiercely, "No, you belong here with us. We love you, and we'll fight for you, no matter what." As Madame Noller's incantations reached a crescendo, the closet door swung wide open, revealing the full horror of the realm within. A vortex of swirling darkness, studded with stars that were not stars but eyes, hungry and watching. The figures within moved closer, their forms more discernible, twisted, humanoid shapes, their features grotesque parodies of human grief and despair. Mark, standing protectively in front of his family, felt a cold hand grip his heart. The fear was almost overpowering, but the sight of his family, their faces set with determination, bolstered his resolve. He stepped forward, placing himself directly between the open closet and his family. "Leave us," he shouted into the abyss. "This is our home, not yours." The shadows hesitated, then surged forward, as if provoked by his challenge. But before they could cross the threshold, the symbols Madame Noller had drawn flared brightly, creating a barrier. The figures screamed in frustration, their voices a cacophony of anger and pain, before retreating slightly. Taking advantage of their hesitation, Madame Noller thrust her hands forward, sending a wave of radiant energy towards the closet. The figures shrieked, the sound piercing the air like knives, as they were pushed back further into their dark realm. "We're doing it," Madame Noller exclaimed, her voice tinged with exhaustion but also hope. "Keep focusing on your love, your will to keep Tommy here." The family closed their eyes, each mentally reciting their happiest memories, their most cherished dreams for the future. The room filled with a warm, golden light, stark against the creeping darkness of the closet. Slowly, the vortex began to shrink, the screaming diminished, and the cold receded. The figures became shadows once more, their forms dissolving into the darkness until they were indistinguishable from the void. Breathing heavily, Madame Noller continued her chant, her voice a steady, rhythmic force driving the darkness away. The symbols around the closet burned brighter, sealing the doorway, as the light constricted, closing like the aperture of a camera. Just as it seemed the battle was won, a final, powerful surge of darkness burst from the closet. It was a desperate, furious attempt to maintain its grip on the material world. The light faltered, flickering under the assault. "This is it," Madame Noller shouted. "Hold strong. We're almost there." The Andersons, united in their determination, pushed forward, their love and will manifesting as a shield of radiant energy. The darkness collided with the light, and for a moment, everything stilled, the outcome hanging in the balance. In that suspended moment of stillness, the air crackled with supernatural energy, the very fabric of reality seeming to warp and weave around the Anderson family as they stood defiantly against the encroaching darkness. Then, with a force that felt like the universe itself exhaling, the light surged forward, overwhelming the dark tendrils attempting to hold their ground. The clash between light and darkness was like watching the birth of a star, intense and mesmerizing. The shadows writhed and contorted in agony as the light, pure and unyielding, seared through them, burning away the corruption and fear they had brought into the world. Tommy, his face buried in his mother's shoulder, dared to look up. His eyes, wide with a mix of fear and awe, watched as the shapes that had terrorized him retreated further, their forms dissolving under the relentless onslaught of light. He squeezed his mother's hand, finding comfort in the warmth of her grasp, a stark contrast to the cold he had felt emanating from the closet. Madame Noller, her energy flagging but her spirit unbroken, chanted louder, her voice echoing through the house like a sacred bell. She was a conduit now, channeling the collective will and love of the Anderson family, transforming it into a weapon against the darkness. The symbols around the closet pulsed with a steady, rhythmic glow, each beat pushing the shadows back, sealing the breach that had allowed such terror to spill into their lives. The closet door, once an ominous gateway, now shook violently as if in protest, the dark energy behind it desperate to maintain its foothold in the world. But the family's resolve was stronger. They stood together, hands linked, a chain of hope and determination. Linda, her voice steady and clear, began to recite a poem she had read to Tommy every night before bed, a simple verse about stars and dreams and the protective power of love. Her words wove through the charged air, mingling with the light, reinforcing the barrier. Outside, the storm that had raged as a mirror to their turmoil began to abate. The wind calmed, and the relentless tapping of rain softened to a gentle patter, as if nature itself was holding its breath, watching the battle unfolding within the walls of the house. The darkness made one last, desperate push, a scream of rage and defeat that shook the foundations of the house. The windows rattled, and a fine crack spidered across the living room ceiling. But it was too late for it. The light was overwhelming, consuming, purifying. Slowly, the scream faded into a whimper, and then nothing at all. The oppressive presence that had filled the house, that had turned their home into a battleground, was retreating, beaten back by the unbreakable bonds of a family united. The glow from the symbols began to fade, each pulse growing softer, more rhythmic, until they too settled into a gentle, soothing light. The closet door slammed shut with a definitive thud, as if sealing away the last whispers of darkness. Madame Noller ceased her chanting, her breaths heavy and labored from the exertion. She turned to the family, a tired smile spreading across her face. "It's done," she said simply. But her eyes, wary and watchful, told a different story. The family embraced, relief and exhaustion mingling in their tears. They had won, for now, but the look in Madame Noller's eyes was a clear reminder the darkness had been pushed back, not destroyed. Whatever had been opened by the Whitmore family decades ago was not so easily closed. As they pulled apart from their embrace, the house settling around them, the silence was profound, a stark contrast to the cacophony of their battle. But in that silence lay a whisper, a promise of the darkness's return. They knew the fight was not over, it had merely paused, gathering strength for the next round. In the days that followed, the Andersons worked to restore their home, repairing the physical reminders of their ordeal. But the deeper scars, the ones wrought by fear and the touch of the otherworldly, were harder to mend. Tommy was quieter now, his dreams filled with shadows and whispers. Linda and Mark watched over him, their vigilance a constant guard against the unseen threat. Madame Noller stayed with them, her presence a comforting reminder of their victory, but also a grim harbinger of the battles to come. She spent her days reinforcing the seals, researching ancient texts for a more permanent solution. At night, they would gather in the living room, the family and their guardian against the dark, listening to the quiet creaks and sighs of the house. Each sound was a reminder of the thin veil between their world and the one that had tried to claim their son. And in the depths of each night, as the world held its breath, They could feel it, the pulsing shadow behind the closet door despite their hard-won peace. A subtle unease lingered in the air, a shadow at the edge of their vision that never fully receded. Madame Nolar's presence in the house was a constant reminder that this peace was fragile, a temporary reprieve in a longer, darker battle yet to be concluded. As autumn gave way to the harsh winds of winter, the days grew shorter, and the nights longer and deeper. The darkness outside seemed to press against the windows with increased curiosity, as if sensing the weakening barriers between the worlds. The family felt it too, a creeping dread that settled into the corners of their newly repaired home, silent yet oppressive. One chilly evening, with the wind howling like a mournful spectre outside, the family gathered in the living room, the fireplace casting a warm glow against the encroaching cold. Tommy sat close to the fire, his eyes reflecting the flickering flames, but his mind clearly elsewhere. Linda watched her son, her heart aching with a mother's worry. Since the night of the ritual, Tommy had been different, more withdrawn, his bright laughter replaced with quiet contemplation. It was as if part of him had never fully returned from that dark threshold in his closet. Mark, noticing the pensive mood, decided to break the silence. "How about a game night?" he suggested, trying to inject some cheer into the evening. "It's been a while since we had one." Tommy looked up, a slight smile touching his lips, and nodded. The family set up the board game, a simple game of strategy and luck, and for a few hours, the laughter returned to the house. The game was a distraction, a semblance of normalcy in a world that had shifted beneath their feet. But as they played, a soft thumping sound began to echo through the house. Initially dismissed as the house settling or the wind against the siding, the sound grew louder, more insistent. Thump, thump, thump. It seemed to be coming from upstairs, specifically from Tommy's room. Madame Nolar, who had been quietly observing from her armchair, stiffened. Her eyes, sharp and alert, flicked to the ceiling. "It's starting again," she murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. Mark and Linda exchanged worried glances, the memories of that night flooding back, reigniting the fear they had worked so hard to suppress. Gathering his courage, Mark stood. "I'll go check it out," he said, his voice steady despite the palpable fear that tinged it. "No, I'll go with you," Linda insisted, standing as well. Together, they ascended the stairs, each step creaking under the weight of their apprehensive hearts. At the top of the stairs, the thumping grew louder, more desperate. It was coming from behind Tommy's closed bedroom door. Mark reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and pushed the door open. The room was dark, the only light coming from the hallway behind them. The thumping stopped abruptly, replaced by a chilling silence. Then, from the depths of the closet, a faint glow began to illuminate the wooden doors. It was a sickly, greenish light, pulsating gently like the breathing of some slumbering beast. Linda clutched Mark's arm, her eyes wide with fear. "Not again," she whispered. Mark, his jaw set with determination, stepped into the room. "We beat it once," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "We'll beat it again." Behind them, the sound of small footsteps approached. Tommy stood at the doorway, his eyes fixed on the closet. "It never left," he said, his voice small and haunted. "It's been waiting." As the family stood, facing the glowing closet once more, the air around them thickened with the promise of a renewed battle. This time, they knew what they faced, and while fear gripped their hearts, so too did a fierce resolve. Madame Nolar joined them, her expression grim. "We need to prepare," she said. "This isn't over. It's just beginning." And as the wind outside mourned through the eaves of the house, the family braced themselves for what was to come, united by love, fear, and the unyielding human spirit to protect their own. The glow from the closet grew stronger, casting long, twisted shadows across Tommy's room. The air felt charged, electric, as if the house itself braced for the impending confrontation. Mark, Linda, and Madame Nola formed a protective ring around Tommy, each facing the ominous light with a mixture of resolve and trepidation. Madame Nola stepped forward, her voice firm. "We will end this tonight," she declared, pulling from her bag an array of ancient artifacts and symbols, each imbued with protective powers. She began to arrange them in a precise pattern on the floor, creating a barrier between them and the closet. Tommy, clutching his mother's hand, watched the closet door with wide, fearful eyes. The light within flickered, as though agitated by their preparations. "Whatever comes through that door, stay behind me," Mark instructed, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. As the final symbol was placed, the room temperature dropped sharply. A deep, resonant hum filled the air, emanating from the closet. The door began to vibrate, then slowly swung open, revealing a deep, impenetrable darkness. From the darkness, a figure emerged, its form shifting and twisting, hard to focus on as if made of smoke and shadow. It stepped forward, the floorboards creaking under its weight. The air around it seemed to distort, reality bending unnaturally. "We do not fear you," Madame Nola shouted into the dark, her voice echoing powerfully. "You are bound by the ancient laws that govern you, and tonight, we invoke those laws against you." She began to chant in a language long forgotten by the world of the living, her voice rising and falling in a mesmerizing rhythm. The symbols on the floor glowed brightly, a golden light that countered the darkness emanating from the figure. The figure halted, its form seeming to struggle against the light. It let out a howl, a sound so desolate and terrifying it chilled them to the bone. But the family stood firm, their unity a bastion against the darkness. Tommy, feeling the strength of his family and their protector, stepped forward. "This is our home," he cried out. "You don't belong here." Empowered by the child's bravery, the light from the symbols surged, enveloping the figure in a blaze of radiant energy. The figure writhed, its form disintegrating under the assault of light and ancient magic. The chanting reached a crescendo, and with a final, defiant shout from Madame Nola, the figure exploded into a cloud of shadow and light. The darkness was pushed back, sucked back into the closet as if by a mighty breath being inhaled. Silence fell upon the room, heavy and complete. The closet door swung gently before coming to a rest, the evil that had once dwelled behind it now gone. Madame Nola, exhausted, slumped slightly, supported by Mark. "It is done," she breathed, a weary smile touching her lips. Linda hugged Tommy tightly, tears of relief and joy streaming down her face. "It's over, baby." "It's finally over," she whispered. The family spent a few moments in each other's arms, the relief palpable in their tight embrace. Madame Nola began to gather her artifacts, her movements slow but satisfied. As the dawn crept through the curtains, casting light on the remnants of their ordeal, the house felt different, lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted. The sun's rays touched each face, warming them, healing them. From that day on, the Anderson family lived in peace. The darkness that had haunted their home was no more, banished by the light of their courage and the strength of their love. Tommy grew up brave and strong, forever marked by the night he stood against the shadows, but never again haunted by them. And in the heart of the house, the closet door remained firmly shut, its secrets locked away forever. For in the end, it was not just the magic that had saved them, but their unbreakable bond, a family's love, the most powerful force of all. **** at the end, ***.